So we should now be live on Facebook in the Balanced Lounge. So hi guys, everyone should know me, Juliet, obviously your host, and I'm so excited to have a guest with me this evening. So I told you that we're going to be live 8:30, and I have the lovely Charlotte Hopkins with me, who's a drug and alcohol expert. And we're going to be having a chat this evening about drugs and alcohol. So I know that a lot of you were really excited about this and had asking for some support around self-sabotage and around addictions and around drugs and alcohol. And that was why I thought it would be really useful to have Charlotte come and join us and share some useful insights. So thanks for joining us this evening, Charlotte.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's great to have you here in the group. And what I'm going to do, Zoom nowadays, you can't see questions obviously when you stream. So I've got my phone, I'll have a look as we go. And if any questions come up while we're talking, because I know quite a lot of people wanted to catch us in the live. Some people said they'd rescheduled their diaries and things for today. They had diarised the session tonight, which is great because they really wanted to join this session. And some others we're not going to join the live, but they won't going to join the replay later. So I will just keep an eye just in case there's any questions. So if anyone's watching and they want to ask myself or Charlotte while we're chatting, just pop it into the comments and we can try and cover that off as we go.
Definitely.
So Charlotte, tell us a bit about what you do just now.
Wow, that's a big question. So I now have kind of two heads. So I've been in drug and alcohol and the sector of drugs and alcohol for, well, I say 20 years, but I've been saying that for at least 4 years now. So it is nearly 25 years. And over the last 10 years, whereas previously I worked really closely with those people who were drug and alcohol users, so worked within the prisons, probation service, worked with homelessness services, social services, etc. For the past 10 years, I've specifically concentrated on supporting the workforce. So I have a training company myself now, and we do lots of training consultancy work for basically anybody who comes across clients who have drug or alcohol issues. So we've got some work at the moment with Welsh Government. But on the flip side of that, I do like to keep my hand in and support some people. And don't work with very many people, but the people we work with around their drug and alcohol use now tends to be very highly successful, highly functioning drug or alcohol users, mainly alcohol, mainly cocaine. Mainly alcohol and cocaine together. But yeah, 80% of the people that have a kind of regular use of drugs or alcohol tend to be really high functioning. And if we look at, as you know, I talk a lot about drugs and alcohol combined. So although I will naturally talk a lot about alcohol today, because let's be fair, most of us, probably all of us, can relate to that in some way or other. But I guess the caveat is that cocaine is another really common substance that's used. We just don't openly talk about that so much in a public forum. But they go, for some people, hand in hand. And there's lots of different trends that we're seeing at the moment with recent situations where drug supplies are different. They're really hard to get hold of at the moment. So alcohol consumption has gone up a little bit amongst those people who use it really regularly. So the short answer is I do a lot of training, I do a lot of consultancy, and I do some one-to-one recovery coaching as well. But that was just a really Charlotte long-winded way of telling you.
It's really interesting though, ways that you support individuals, inside and outside the workplace, relating to this. And that tells us just how much of, I guess, a widespread issue it is now when we're actually having these conversations in the workplace as well. So I do think that is absolutely, fascinating. And I do know, obviously, from my work in HR, that some organisations do, drug and alcohol testing and all of these sorts of things. So it is much more visible, I guess, now than, in terms of the usage of it and, when it's becoming an issue, than perhaps it would have been, a few years ago, potentially, as these sorts of testing and these sorts of things have evolved.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, actually. We've been doing a piece of work specifically around the workplace and supporting organisations with, making sure that they're not just testing as a kind of beating stick.
Yeah.
And there's lots of focus at the moment, isn't there, around workplace mental health and workplace well-being. And actually what the research shows us is, for those people, the way I look at it, nobody thinks, oh, I'm going to have a glass of wine tonight, and in 2 years' time, I'm going to be an alcoholic, or I'm going to have a line of Coke, I'm going to give it a go, and in 5 years' time, I'm going to spend £300 a weekend on my cocaine. Nobody sets out to develop an addiction in anything, really. And I think workplace policies in particular can be really, really harsh. And when the people that we work with who are highly successful, are CEOs of organizations, are professional footballers, actresses, are those people who are surgeons, medical staff, that kind of thing, teachers, then these people are still functioning. Their workplace may suspect, but for most of them, they're still performing, they still have relationships, they're still doing hobbies. So our societal picture of somebody with addiction tends to be somebody who's failing at everything. But the reality is, when we look at the links between kind of high performance, mental ill health, so not necessarily a diagnosis, but just that anxiety, that stress, that overwhelm, and then substance use, mainly alcohol use, they're actually really, really well connected. So I always find it really sad that organizations will have this blanket policy of zero tolerance, but actually when they dig into it, maybe the work environment is what's caused that elevation in use as well.
You're absolutely right, because a lot of workplaces can have a really, highly demanding culture where employees are actually almost encouraged to always go that extra mile, to always do more, to always be more, to always be on the go, almost that kind of 24/7 mentality. Especially when you're talking about professions that you've just mentioned, where you have a thriving career if you're able to operate under those circumstances. But we just know that the human body isn't designed to just keep going all the time. We obviously go in cycles, and we have to have recovery periods and things like that as well. We're seeing a lot more people talking about self-sabotage now. I do think people are hearing, this label. They're having a general understanding around some of the activities that are healthy and some of the activities that are not healthy, and they're having, much more awareness now. But how would you suggest that someone knows, for example, when a problem's a problem? You mentioned, having a line of Coke at the weekend and a night out, or, having a glass of wine in an evening after work to de-stress. At what point does someone think that, that a problem is a problem?
Yeah, and I think it's like that how long is a piece of string kind of a question. So in my head, there's 4 types of users. So the first one is that experimental. Now, 99.9% of the population will be able to say, I've experimented with some kind. Now, I won't ask people to put in the chat what they've experimented with, but I'm sure if I did, there would be some people that would go, well, yeah, not sure I want to admit that, because that's just the way that it is. So if we look at alcohol in particular, we can probably all tell of a time when we were in a kind of 15, 16, 17, 18, whether we were high school, I'm Welsh, so it was high school for me, or if it was university, which it might be for some people. When they try alcohol for the first time, let's be fair, most of us will say, that is disgusting. Like, oh, I don't enjoy that at all. But yet we persevere. So we will experiment to find our ideal drink. So I now like a G&T, and I do like a pint. I don't have a pint very often, but I know what I like. I know to avoid Archers with all costs. So we've experimented. We've tried it out for the first time. We've tried out different aspects of it. We want to make it work. Why do we want to make something that is essentially poison, and it makes us intoxicated, makes us uncoordinated, makes us slurge, makes us get into trouble, makes us snog boys that maybe we don't want to be snogging, that kind of thing?
So you're giving me flashbacks. For me in Scotland, it was high school as well, and I specifically remember being about 15 and actually vomiting from alcohol, but continuing to force it to fit in with my friends and what everyone else was doing.
So we need to keep that in mind as I progress through. fitting in is something that's really, really important to remember. But also we see the positives. So we might have seen our parents or our elder siblings or our cousins or just our friends go out and be giggly and laugh. And we think, I want to be part of that. So there's an element of kind of tribalness within drinking. So we'll experiment with certain things. Now, if your social group experiments with cocaine or cannabis or even heroin, then there may be times when you get pushed to that pressure, and that might not come from that other person. That might come from you just thinking, do you know what? That confidence that person has with a bit of Charlie, I want a bit of that. Or you've had a few beers and you think, oh, do you know what? Let's just give it a go. Let's be brave. Let's just do it. And if you're in that circle, again, it's about that social norming. So we become part, we want to be part of that crowd. Does that change as we get older? I'm not so sure. However, we do become better at saying no. So we've got that experimental use. What we then find is that we find our drug of choice. Now, most people, as I say, will choose alcohol because it's legal. So that's the reality of it. If all of these substances were legal, there's probably substances that might be better suited. So for example, I'm quite an energetic person. So I often get asked, have I been taking ecstasy or cocaine? It's just the nature of my kind of character. And I probably have that cocaine ego at times as well. But I choose alcohol because it's not worth my job. And actually, I've got enough energy. I think all of my friends and certainly my husband would say, please don't ever give her cocaine. So she doesn't need to have any stimulants. So we find our drug of choice.
Yeah.
So we find that impact, that effect. Recreational use is a really interesting term. Now, if I was to say that I have a glass of wine every night with my meal, and I have one every night with my meal, most people would say, yeah, me too. Or lots of people, not most people, that's not fair, but lots of people would say, yeah, me too. But if I said I had a glass of wine with my breakfast, there would be a very different reaction. There would be a very different thought process. There would be a very different acceptability of that. So even if I have that one glass of wine at tea time or one glass of wine with breakfast, nothing else, logically, it's one glass of wine. So physically, it's not going to do any different in the morning or at tea time. But there's something about that acceptability. So when we look at recreational use and when we start to look at when something's problematic, if you're getting up in the morning and thinking, oh God, I could murder a glass of wine, maybe you might just want to start thinking about where that has come from. If you're having a glass of wine at tea time, that's great. If you're having a bottle of wine every night with tea, or you've noticed that your one glass of wine's turned to 2 glasses of wine, or you've noticed the 2.5 glasses has now turned to, well, you may as well finish the bottle off, and that bottle is, but I've got another one in the fridge, I'll just crack that open. Again, you might be having a recreational use because it's the same time every day, but often people would justify that because it is tea time and after work. My big question when we start to really look at whether something's recreational or whether it becomes more problematic or an issue somebody needs to think about is, has that increased? So are you using far more than you used to be using? And actually the amounts you started with, are they giving you the desired effect? Because our brain is so clever. So when we have pretty much any substance, various different chemicals get released, but dopamine in particular is great. And it's amazing at tricking the brain into thinking that this is the only way to relax. And there's tons and tons of studies, isn't there, around, and you probably know better than me, around NLP and all the different, kind of CBT, all the different ways of the brain working. That says we can talk ourselves into anything. But it is so much easier to talk yourself into a bottle of wine at the end of a heavy night or a heavy working day, because that's the only way we can relax. And our brain starts to self-sabotage there. So not only are we building the memory bank that says you have to have a glass of wine with your meal, so when we don't have a glass with a meal, our brain says, warning, warning, there's something missing. Because of the way that alcohol in particular works, you could build a tolerance and not feel any effects from a bottle of wine in as much as a month, maybe 3 weeks. So tolerance to alcohol will build in exactly the same as tolerance to heroin. And that's a crazy thought for lots of people. But if you use that glass of wine over 3 days, 4 days, by day 5, you'll probably need a glass and a half, 2 glasses to get that same effect.
Yeah.
So it becomes a real snowball impact. The third kind of pattern of use, I guess, is specifically around dependence. And I like to think of this as a more physical aspect of it. So if we take alcohol again, what we have is the body physically needs that alcohol to function. So one of the things that I ask in the work that I do with anybody I work with is, we often hear people say, well, just give it up. And it's a real concern for anybody who works in drug and alcohol services to just say to somebody, stop your alcohol use, because the risks of fits and seizures are really, really high. So the tolerance there and that sudden withdrawal can ultimately, without sounding like a scaremonger, can kill somebody. Somebody who, for example, has been taking cocaine on a regular basis is just basically working on their dopamine and serotonin, and cocaine blocks the reuptake. So without getting too technical, what that means is you just need to wait for your system to flush it out. So there's not really much you can do. So that's why we have that crash, and lots of heavy cocaine users talk about their kind of miserable Mondays because they've used quite heavily on a Friday or Saturday. Probably most of them have started on a Thursday, maybe finished on a Sunday. So by the Monday, Tuesday, their brain is just frazzled. They've depleted their serotonin, they've depleted their dopamine, and it needs to just slowly fill back up. And I don't have time to go into it now, but I always use an example of a toilet cistern. Mm-hmm. When you flush the toilet, essentially, you flush all of your dopamine and serotonin in one go, and it's like waiting for the cistern to refill. And what happens is often we keep flushing. So that's where we start to build this dependence around this substance. Now, if you suddenly pulled cannabis or suddenly pulled cocaine or any of the kind of stimulant substances like ecstasy, you will feel pretty shitty. I hope I can swear. I hope that's okay. You will feel pretty shitty, but you're not going to have any massive life-threatening risks, which you would have with alcohol. So people often say, well, isn't that addiction? For me, the physical aspect of that can be treated really easily. So lots of people I've worked with will have a heavy tolerance to alcohol. They'll go into hospital, they'll have a detox, they'll come out, and some might go for, a few weeks, a few months. They'll be in this kind of state of, oh, look at me, I'm cured, I've done it. But actually for many people, because they don't necessarily deal with the reasons behind their use and what they're masking and what it was doing for them, then often what happens is they go back to using, and it might creep up slowly. But lots of people, especially alcohol in particular, lots of people I've worked with, actually both cocaine and alcohol, the compulsion to use is what causes the addiction. Mm-hmm. So if I was to say what causes problematic use when it becomes an issue, that will be completely open to you, me, the 10 people listening, my husband, or whoever is there. So there's certain telltale signs like a physical compulsion, but then there's also those psychological things that we really need to think about. And often as a bystander, as somebody who's looking into the life of somebody who's got any kind of addiction, we don't see the positives. And for most people, they're still getting some kind of pleasure. And I think we often forget that actually, even with that mammoth hangover at 15 where we snogged that lad down the road, we still got up and went, oh, I'm never going to drink again until Friday.
Yeah. And that's exactly the thing, that you hear from people when they're having, that period where everything's crashing, everything's falling low. You do hear them never doing that again until another event happens. And then they find themselves in this, this pattern, in this loop, this cycle that inevitably can become, it's very, very difficult and a huge wall to break through to get through that addiction. And certainly a lot of people I would speak to, for example, that explains why that one glass of wine turned into the bottle, and then in some cases inevitably go on to, vodka, whiskey, gin, much stronger types of alcohol, because as you've mentioned, that tolerance is building over actually a very quick period of time.
Yeah, and when you ask people why they started, more often than not, the same as you or I, it was fun. it was enjoyable. It made me relax. It helped me distress.
Boredom, sociable. There's all these
Loneliness,
sorts of innocent type reasons how they started. As you say, no one thinks in a year's time, 3 years time, 5 years time that they're going to end up where they were.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy for me to get absorbed in this world because that's what I know and that's what I do. And I think a lot of the people who I work with who now still work in there are social workers, probation officers, therapists. They're people who are very much at the entrenched end of substance use. And, there was a recent piece of study done with the ONS. So it was an anonymized study. I think it was about 26,500 people. And of the people who disclosed using drugs or alcohol, 80% of them were working. Now, of that 80%, only around 20% of those will need any additional support. Most of those people, 60% of those people, or 80% of the 80, I should say, those people they might identify they've got an issue and then they'll be fine. But there's most of those people will just be able to go, oh yeah, I drank far too much. But if you think of it as a tip imbalance, often those people who are drinking too much, they look at what they've got in their lives and they're able to balance that back up, and they reduce the alcohol so that whatever's going on in their life becomes the priority as opposed to the substance use.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, I don't know if my connection's okay, just when we start getting services, because what strikes me is when for example, there's a lot of support networks out there for people who their lives are falling apart because of addiction, or they're, for example, idle, or they're having other mental health issues that might be, related or unrelated to sort of wanting to reach out for around alcohol or drugs. Where would they start?
I think, I'm not 100% sure the question was, but I think what you were asking is if somebody's found themselves using and they've got a kind of more entrenched use, where would they go for support?
Yeah, where would they even start reaching out for support?
So for me, there's a couple of things. I think it starts with ourselves. So one of the first questions we ask anybody that comes through our doors in Vita Orbis is, when's the last time you had an evening without a drink? Or when's the last time you had a weekend without a binge session? When's the last time you were able to de-stress, or whatever the positives are for you, do it without substances? And many people will approach their use with rose-tinted glasses. So it has to start with that person. And it is the hardest thing for family members and loved ones to watch, because there's a whole thing called the cycle of change. And most people, when they start to, they're in this pre-contemplation stage, so they don't identify that they themselves have this issue. So it has to start with you just even being open to looking at this. And there's some amazing resources. So there's a brilliant resource called Drink Wise, Age Well. It is aimed at the over 55s, but it's a brilliant resource. So definitely have a look at that. And it allows you to do a little calculator, and that will identify and tell you kind of ear point you to where you need to go. There are some incredible community services as well. So in every local authority area across the UK, there is open access, free at point of service support. Within those services, you will get a comprehensive assessment. You can get liver function tests. You can get bloodborne virus testing. You can get access to all kinds of support. So there is plenty of support in that community for you. And if you're not sure where to find that, then your GP will be able, or should be able, to signpost you there. We offer in...
That's a problem. It's a lot of people that you speak to in professional roles feel a bit active about up the support in those areas, or I've certainly heard them say that they feel embarrassed, ashamed. They don't want people to find out about their usage, because if it is in the area, they might run the risk of, meeting someone that they know, as an example.
Absolutely.
So, I think that can be a problem when it comes to accessing those resources that you're saying are widely available in there.
And that is exactly why we set up Vita Orbis. So Vita Orbis means navigating your life. So it's all about navigating the freedom from substance use, whatever it is. It's a completely discretionary service. So essentially, a lot of the people, we've even had a Princess Leia born in the fifth realm, born in 1801, I think the date of birth was. So my business partner and I, we've both been in services for a combined, probably nearly 50 years now, but 45 years I'm going to go with. So we've got masses of experience behind this. And we've got a social worker on the team then who supports with us as well. And Vita Orbis was specifically set up. So I work frontline services directly with service users for 12 years, and services are incredible. But I know that I wouldn't walk into a local service because I wouldn't want to risk bumping into a colleague or even a client. I wouldn't want that. So we recognized that there was this massive gap. So we really wanted to be able to offer that support that is completely discretionary for those people who are never going to walk in. So I could give you a list of amazing, incredible services, both nationally and locally. But the reality is there is always going to be this kind of 1% to 2% who are never going to access those services. If you feel that you want somebody more local, then I would definitely just do that due diligence, because addiction is something that people have to be aware of. And I think there's so many therapists and practitioners out there who have a real interest in working with addiction. But if you don't go to specialists, then make sure that whoever you're working with has some level of understanding, so that if you are using substances fairly heavily, that you have to be honest with your therapist, let's be fair. So if you've got something that's causing a problem, if you're not willing to go and talk to your therapist or your counsellor or your coach or whoever it is that you're working with and be open and honest about that substance use,
it's not going to work.
You may as well pour your money down the drain. So we kind of recognize that, and that's what we wanted to offer. And we don't have big volumes of numbers of people coming through, because most high performing professionals will keep going until something starts to crumble. But yeah, we've definitely seen a rise in uptake in the last, certainly in the last few weeks.
I say that I do have seen people comment, more on Facebook. I think at the beginning, when lockdown started, it was, I'm having a glass of wine, or the novelty. This is, something new. So we're having cocktails, we're having things. This, by the way, this extends to food as well. I've had something like it's not this list of other things. We're just definitely talking about this tonight, but we're talking about, even food. Top down, they find that they've, been using that more out of that boredom, out of that worry, out of whatever that reason is, and they are kind of ways to, improve a connection coming and going. I keep getting a little sign. Sorry if it's cutting out.
I'm gonna.
Just having when you go, sorry.
I was going to jump in while you were kind of intermittent. I absolutely agree. I think I'm somebody who's definitely eaten more throughout lockdown. Absolutely 100%. I probably have put on about half a stone over lockdown, mainly eating ice cream. But lovely. I think we've got a beautiful ice cream parlour in Wales as well. It's just lovely. So they obviously sell that. I've done social distancing, I promise. But yeah, it doesn't really matter what the addiction is. And yes, okay, there's certain things that will maybe cause more immediate harm. But I'm a self-confessed workaholic. I work far too hard, but I get a lot of pleasure from it. So, my mum really worries about that. In lockdown, as soon as we went into lockdown, the first thing I did was sign up for a brand new 6-month course. I can tell you, 6 weeks in, I'm thinking, I'm exhausted. Why have I done it? But that was my coping mechanism. So my coping mechanism is to plow my energy into work. My coping mechanism is to, I love to eat. If you're somebody who loves to have a drink, then it's quite easy to do it. And I've definitely seen an increase in gin o'clock, those posts where, there's those mums that say, is it acceptable to be drinking wine whilst homeschooling? All those kind of posts, which of course, on the whole, for most people are memes and they're there to be funny. But there's definitely more of them. And we did our first non-social isolation walk. Wales has only just this weekend allowed it. And we walked down kind of to our local area, and there was loads of people having picnics, but there was loads of people just with a can or two of beer with their food. And they've got kids with them. Some didn't, some did. But there was definitely more people recreationally drinking than there would normally be. So I think as a nation, we might all need to be just doing a quick unit test to see how much we've actually consumed.
Yeah, because especially we don't realise when we're driving and things like that the next day. I mean, in the UK, a lot of the driving rules changed a few years ago and got a lot tighter in relation to, alcohol and drugs. And certainly if people don't have an appreciation, they're not realising through the course of the day how much they're consuming, it can even affect and influence the next day. And then that's not even taking into account as workplaces are now going back, if people are operating machinery or surgeons or whatever that might be, then it is certainly something that everyone, should be thinking about at this point, not just for the obvious health benefits, but for all of these other kind of external reasons as well.
Yeah, definitely. It takes approximately 1 hour for 1 unit of alcohol to process through a healthy liver. So let's be fair, most of us don't have 100% healthy livers. There's probably some level of fatty liver because our diet as a nation is not great either. So it's going to be realistically maybe 1 to 2 hours per unit. Now, if you've had, I think we've talked about it before, I'm Welsh, I'm a rugby girl. If I go out for the rugby, I could quite easily drink I used to be able to drink probably 6 pints, and I'm 5'3". I not anymore, but I previously could. Now that would take me maybe 12 hours to process, if not more, so 15 hours. So if you don't stop drinking until later on in the night, if we look at a classic cocaine user, for example, very few cocaine users don't have alcohol. When you add cocaine and alcohol together, you get an additional chemical called cocaethylene, which essentially is really toxic to the liver. So therefore, you're then looking at the elongated time for the alcohol to process through the system. Cocaine's keeping you up because you just want to party. The alcohol's lowering your inhibition, so you think, let's just keep going. Some people then will be not finishing a night out until maybe 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. For many people, they're then up the next day. Now, most parents won't. They just know. If any parents are listening, you know that there's nothing worse than young children and a hangover. So you balance that and you think, I can't drink, I can't take cocaine like I used to because I've got to be up in the morning. But there's still lots and lots of people who will get up then the next day because they're going to go and see their parents for Sunday lunch, or they're going back out with mates, or they're going to play football or whatever it is. It's then that people find themselves driving. It's then that people find themselves still intoxicated, but because they weren't as intoxicated as last night, they're looking again through that rose-tinted glasses. So they go, I'm okay. And as we said before, the brain's got an incredible ability to persuade us of anything. So it's really easy for us to say, right, well, actually, I shouldn't be driving until 2 o'clock this afternoon. It's 12 o'clock, or I'll be okay. And the police are shit hot on that now. That's what they look for more than, we're very good at not drink driving as a nation. We're not so good at not drink driving the morning after while still intoxicated.
It is. It's such a I guess a frightening thing, to think that stays in your body and has such an impact for that length of time. When you mentioned that there, 6 pints, that just makes you really think about how long that period of time actually is, that recovery period. And there's reasons for that as well, because obviously it is impacting the physical systems and our cells in our body, our ability to respond, our ability to function, in a safe way. this has all been really massively insightful for me, and I'm sure it has been for the people in the group as well. Nobody actually has asked any questions. There's a few people watching, but nobody actually has any questions. So that tells me that they're learning, which is really, really good.
It's a real common thing. It's one of those substances, one of those subjects that people go, I might have questions 3 days later.
Yeah.
I'm lucky with my topic.
And where would they find you if they did have more questions?
So I'm more than happy, if anybody's got any private messaging they want to do, then I'm more than happy to take that. There's, possibly people who at some point might want to have a conversation. So please reach out and just, you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on LinkedIn. And I like to think I look like my profile picture. There's a profile picture of 20 years ago. So it should be fairly easy to find. But I've also got a business page, which is Charlotte Hopkins, and it's got the Happy Pursuit of Excellence on there. But you'll find, I think it'll be quite obvious. You'll hopefully see that I'm the same person. Please reach out on social media. Our website's either Kinbee, which is KINBEE.co.uk. And if anybody really wants complete discretion, so they've got maybe some concerns about them or a loved one, maybe I could just send you links and you can just maybe pop them in the
I'll pop them in.
And if we've got our website there, our email address there is just hello@vitaorbis.co.uk. So if anybody really wants complete discretion, they literally want to be called Princess Leia, born of the fifth realm, then they can set up kind of like a fake email address and just get in contact with us that way. I would say 90% of the people usually reach out with their details, but there are 1 or 2 people that really, do not want us to know who they are. They just want that support.
Yeah. I'm just seeing a comment come in. I feel like I deserve a drink because I've been at home dealing with the kids. It's more a habit than anything. Plus, when I'm stressed, I can taste wine. And I think this, goes back to what we were saying about the subconscious mind telling us that this is the only way that we can relax. And, certainly for me in my journey, Charlotte, which I know I shared with you before, I was in a very successful global role, very stressed, working 24/7, young child, divorce, grief, lots of things came in, and I certainly used alcohol as my drug of choice. I never really appreciated that it was an issue. I wasn't drinking every day as an example. I was binge drinking, but I don't think that that's any better, because if it's a problem, then it's a problem. If it's having an issue in your life, and certainly it was having issues in my life because I was drinking too much and then having blackouts and things like that obviously wasn't sustainable. So that feeling that we get that it can help us relax, there are actually lots of other ways that we can get that as well. It's just our mind and our thoughts kind of tricks us into thinking that that's what we need to get that feeling, to get that peace, to get that that breath. When there are other ways to do that as well, but it's about retraining the mind, isn't it? It's about learning those new habits and then keeping doing them and being committed, because we don't just suddenly, we weren't born needing alcohol to relax. We weren't born, unless obviously there's something, but that's not what the human body is designed, necessarily for. There are other ways we can achieve it.
Absolutely. And binge drinking is a really interesting thing, because with binge drinking, as somebody who, exactly, I used to work really, 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 really hard. And then, so I was on an autopilot. So I worked, I slept. And then by the time I got to my downtime, I just went, So we know it works. And that's the thing. Part of reframing it is we tell ourselves subconsciously often that this glass of wine will make me relax. If we start to say to ourselves, actually, this glass of wine might make me relax, but it's going to then give me a hangover. It's then going to cause impact and grief with this area. One of the things I think is a really powerful activity to do, if anybody wants to kind of really look at their alcohol use, is have a drinks diary. So really look at the volume that you're drinking, look at the percentages as well, because often people say, well, I'm only having three gins, but then a gin is generally 40% volume. So 3 gins and 40% volume is slightly different to 1 glass of wine. So you kind of need to look at that. But really look at the pros and cons. So what are you actually getting? So that 1 glass of wine, is it actually relaxing you? Because most of the time it isn't. there's most of the time you just find yourself going, yeah, I am relaxed. But actually, if you'd done something else, you would have been more relaxed. The difference is that one glass of wine often is fairly harmless, but as it grows, that
Yeah.
use then starts to become something that you will then go, yeah, but I don't want to wait. So now the reason I don't drink 6 pints, or really even 2 pints, is because I know that hangover is just a waste of my time. I do not want to waste my time feeling hungover. I am not the best mum if I've been drinking. So it's when you start to look at the pros and cons of drinking and what it is actually, and this is where I say you've got to be conscious, you've got to be honest with yourself. When you start to really look and be honest with yourself, you're probably not getting that benefit that you think you are.
And a couple of people have just commented to say that they actually worry themselves after they've had a drink because they wake up with bruises, and I guess they've not said, but I'm assuming what they mean is they don't remember how they got the bruise, or they can't remember getting to bed. And that is, quite scary. And I've been there, I've been in nights out where I can't remember how I got home, at a certain point in my life, I used to wake up and say, am I alive? Am I whole? Where's my bag? Where's my jewelry? Where's my purse? Where's my cards? Where's my phone? And it literally was like a checklist in my mind. I didn't want to get out of bed until I put my hand everywhere to see where everything was, because I wasn't quite sure that I was ready to face the consequences yet.
Yeah, I'm chuckling because a big turning point for me was I went to an awards show, and I'd quit my job. So I knew that I wasn't going to be around kind of this group of people for a while. So I kind of just let my hair down a little bit, and I wasn't really intoxicated, but I was enough intoxicated to eat popcorn when I got home. And I woke up in the morning, and for literally about probably 20 seconds, I thought my teeth had all fallen out, because all I could feel was stumps on my teeth.
Yeah.
Until the conscious came round and I went, oh no, that's just toffee popcorn, thank goodness. But I genuinely had this panic that I was like, oh my God, my teeth are gone, what have I done to my teeth? And for that short time, I genuinely couldn't remember. Yeah, and I think that's what alcohol does. So the pluses are, it will relax you, it will slow the central nervous system down, it will help you kind of relax, it will help you de-stress, it will release those kind of hormones that will go, but it also then brings a lack of coordination. It also brings memory loss. It also then can bring anxiety out. I get really anxious now if I drink certain alcohol types. I really notice a difference the day after. And I think when we're younger and we're experimenting, we consciously and subconsciously just ignore the negatives, because we see we see the positives so much more. We've been out with our friends. Of course, we've had a great time. We danced on the table. The older we get, we don't necessarily aspire to dance on tables so much. So the tip imbalance happens. And that's why I think just looking at that pros and cons, and do for both, the pros and cons for drinking alcohol or using cocaine or whatever it is, and then the pros and cons for stopping. Mm-hmm. And usually you'll find that it really tips that balance outside of alcohol.
Yeah, and coming back to, what I call anchors, that tasting the wine, that thinking we need it to relax. Most people that follow me in the group know that I always have a herbal tea in the evening. So I've usually got a pot of herbal tea or a cup of herbal tea. I've got my essential oils and things like that, because there are other things that we can do to get, that release of hormones in our body, to soothe the nervous system, to calm our system down, to prepare for bed, to de-stress, to release tension. There's lots of other things, that we can do. Exercise, sex, a shower, there's lots of other fun ways to achieve it. But when we're used to one, our brain will go to that one because it's inherently lazy and it wants to, have that tried and tested way. It's that pathway is built. When we break that, we can look for other ways, but obviously depending on what level we're at. You were talking about the 4 different, I guess, types in your mind earlier. I guess depending where we are, that might be safer to look at some of those methods than others. It might be that people have to do a bit more work. If they have a physical addiction and things like that, they should reach out and get professional advice and support before going down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't had a day off alcohol for over a month, I would just go and check in with somebody. And that might be me. Just have a conversation to say, have literally had a drink. if you've been having maybe one glass of wine, the chances are, now this is a sweeping statement, but the chances are you'll be okay. But actually, depending on the volume of alcohol, or when you've come off that alcohol and you're getting proper shakes, so not just kind of like those hangover jitters, but proper shakes, you've got numbness in your fingers, if you're getting body shakes, if you're if you're getting blackouts, or you've experienced blackouts, you've experienced seizures, severe memory loss, all of those kind of things, there's definitely those telltale signs that you don't want to be detoxing on your own, because it's really, really not healthy. And that risk is just too great. And that's why my first thing is really, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to really look and think, oh yeah, actually it's been a while since I have. And that doesn't even necessarily always mean every day, but lots of people, as you kind of mentioned, lots of people will drink for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then they might experience some of those severe withdrawal symptoms Monday, Tuesday, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the point that the alcohol is removed from your system. And for lots of people who are heavy drinkers, they might feel okay for a little bit within that first kind of few hours, but as the day progresses, you will know if it's a big reaction, because you will feel shitty. It's bad enough having just a general hangover from drinking too much, but if you've built up a tolerance and you've got that physical dependence there, you will know. And it's really important that you just have a drink, just to kind of top your system back up and get specialist help.
And it's funny you mentioned that, and I know we're talking specifically about drugs and alcohol, but I remember when I had to stop drinking Diet Coke as an example, the aftermath and the coming off that and the physical symptoms in my body was absolutely horrendous, and I really wasn't prepared for that. So just when you were talking there, it doesn't even necessarily need to be alcohol. For me, at a certain point in life, that was Diet Coke, which is mind-blowing, but I guess people now know a lot more about aspartame and things, but it really does have a huge physical impact on our body.
Absolutely. I have never really been a big Coca-Cola drinker, but what I did do is, I used to be a licensee, so you'd work really crazy long hours, and lived on coffee, and just remember detoxing. And I always thought caffeine was a myth because it didn't do anything for me, until I gave it up and had the worst palpitations. I was having sweats, palpitations, shakes, severe anxiety. And it was purely down to the alcohol. There's nothing else going on. It was down to the caffeine, and it was purely down to the caffeine. And then even now, so I do drink caffeine, but not much. I tend to be a decaf drinker. But if I have a proper coffee, because I do love a coffee, if I do have a proper coffee, I get really bad palpitations. And within about 3 hours, I get stomach cramps and I get really anxious. We've got a huge problem with sugar in the UK. We don't really have a huge problem with crack cocaine, but those similarities are very, very similar.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard people that before there was a challenge, I think last year, 30 days no sugar, and people were just finding it just completely unachievable.
Absolutely. And I think Davina McCall did she's got a book, hasn't she, about the no sugar diet. And I absolutely have far too much sugar in my diet, I've no doubt. And I'm like to think that I'm good. I'm not very good. As an addiction specialist, you think I might do better in the diet bit, but I'm very good at the drug and alcohol work, but not so good at the sugar. And I think part of that is because it's in so many foods that we just don't understand.
It's not the obvious ones like chocolate and the sweeties. It's actually in everything, which is the bigger issue.
And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? So, one of the things that is interesting with cocaine use is you can avoid your dealer. It's very hard to avoid alcohol, and it's even harder. You can't avoid food. So the whole kind of addictions conversation, I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, but the whole addiction thing is always going to be on a spectrum. So it's really important that you are able to work behind what's driving that addiction to be able to conquer it.
And I'm not even sure, and I don't know if this is the right thing to say or not, but I'm not even sure that society is socially acceptable around people declining these things. I've certainly been on nights out where I've chosen not to have any alcohol, and I do have a glass of wine, or if I'm out, I will socially have a drink of something, but on a lot of occasions I don't either. It's just a personal choice, and it's like, or are you expecting? People still have this mindset where it's like the norm to have a, you know, to have a drink. But, you know, I think that's really interesting that still in this day and age that people have that view.
Yeah, and it's all, again, because going back to that term social norming, it's all about us wanting to belong to a tribe. And if somebody sees you pulling away from, if somebody that loves you sees you pulling away from the norm, it makes them uncomfortable. And that's one of the biggest things we talk to people about that we work with is your identity will change. It's not the drug you'll miss, it's your identity. Because if you're known as Crazy Charlotte, who's the proper laugh, you know, when she's on coke, she's a brilliant laugh, it becomes very difficult then to step away from that identity, because that group that you formed are, you know, I don't have any heroin users in my social group. I just don't know heroin users. So if I was to go into that group, I would stick out like a sore thumb. If I was then somebody who was a group of heroin users and then started just using cocaine, I would stick out in that group and they would push me out. So whenever anybody starts to see changes in somebody, it's challenges always that person.
Doesn't it? Because then they have to look at their own self. And it's certainly that's something that I find, because it's almost like you're not fun anymore. You know, you've changed. You're not the same, when really actually you're taking positive steps to look at your life. So I could definitely resonate that from personal experience and from some of the people we work with as well. But I'm conscious that we could talk about this all evening.
We really could.
It's an interesting topic, and I know that we both like to talk. But it is nearly an hour, believe it or not.
I know.
Anticipate. So I am going to end, because I know that we've both got young children, and I'm hoping that mine are sleeping. I don't know about you, but mine might not be. So I'll go and check.
I can guarantee my 12-year-old will not be sleeping, although I have got his headphones, so he won't be able to do the Xbox till 9:30.
Will not be in the good books.
But thank you so much for having me, and thanks to those guys. Thanks to everyone who's listened.
It's been really great. Thank you so much. And I'm glad we had some comments and things like that as well that was really useful. So if you can give me your links, I'll pop them into the group so that people can see you as well. And thank you so much.
No, that's lovely. Thank you very much. And like I say, thank you for listening to us for at least an hour. Or nearly an hour.
Thanks,
Bye.
Charlotte. Bye.